Years ago, I started a podcast called the Sunday Morning Coffee Podcast and recorded 12 episodes. I talked to authors, I talked to TV personalities, I talked to musicians, and I loved every interview. But then I foolishly stopped because that's what I tend to do. I start things, do them for a while, claim that I did it, and then stop. This year, I decided that I wanted to resurrect the Sunday Morning Coffee podcast, and we recently just released our 13th episode, which is one more episode than I released the last time around. So to celebrate episode number 13, I thought I would put together an episode of clips from the first 13 episodes. We're going to start off with clip number 1, which is from episode number 1. My guest was Carmen Theobald of Horse Sense North. And we had a little talk about getting stuck on the railway tracks or in the hamster wheel of life and how to actually live your life and not just be living a life. There's so many parallels, what you just said, to how we interact with our own lives and people. We can either stand on the periphery at a safe distance, or we can take the risk to learn and get our hands dirty and, go for that relationship or that job or that new skill or whatever it may be. And, I mentioned to you earlier that I found myself on those train tracks, just not going anywhere. And that's what I was doing. I was staying on the outside where it was safe. You can't hurt me. I'm out here. But it's unfulfilling. And it's not a good kind of safe. It's a kind of safe that, is like the overprotective parent that won't let you out of the nest. And so when you were saying that, I was listening to the rest of what you were saying, but I was thinking, man, this is like, there's so many parallels to every other aspect of our life with what you just said about, your introduction to the horses and so on.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, Scott. And I can understand it very well. That place that we find ourselves kind of watching our life being lived technically by us, but not really by our heart. And having that courage to let our heart lead the way at least some of the time, and then more and more over time, is scary, and we can get hurt. But the alternative for me, and I think this is kind of what you're saying too, it's scarier because then we're disconnected from our truest, most alive version of ourselves.
And you don't even realize it in the moment. Like if I look back to those, and it wasn't that long ago, I can say, I thought I was living my life, but I really wasn't. It was almost living me. And, I had some people around me that were very good for me in making that apparent, because I can honestly say I'm not sure if I would have at that time. But, the different, like now and for the record, I'm originally from Northern Ontario. I'm born and raised in Mattawa. And sorry, just a surprise little notification came up on my screen here. There we go. Coming back here was part of me taking back my life and taking control, where I was just sort of gliding through and, not really, I would pretty much say without a purpose, and got the new job, which is where we met, obviously. And that job has also, like, it was a perfect storm, because like you were saying earlier, when you're confronted by death, and through my job, I meet a lot of people that have been confronted by death, and it can't help but make you think, man, I'm going to be out of here someday. And is this what I want? on my deathbed to remember my life being. No, that's not what I want. That's not what I want for anybody that cares about me. That's not what I want for myself. And yeah, so sometimes it doesn't, like obviously a traumatic event like what you went through is quite the awakening. But other times you just need someone that gives you that kick in the ass, pardon my language. And I'm very lucky that I had someone that did that for me.
I'm so happy for you too.
So let's sort of, I'm all over the place here. Like I mentioned, I don't really script anything because I just like it to be conversational. So how did you decide on the farm where you currently are? What was it about was it the area? Was it the farm itself? Was it both? What led to that decision?
I would love to answer your question. Do I have permission to put it on pause and circle back to some things that you were saying? Because I just
absolutely,
really,
yeah.
Because I
Go
just
right ahead.
love what you were sharing, and a couple of things came up that I wanted to speak on. One,
absolutely.
I don't think we need a hugely impactful moment to necessarily shift how we're seeing our lives. And this is what I really love about the horses. Yes, we need an impactful moment. I don't mean to say like not impactful, but not traumatic. I don't think we need trauma to create positive transformation.
That's a good thing.
Yeah,
that's a good thing. Yeah.
And I see that all the time happen here with clients and the horses, where we can have these moments where the more we get connected to our body, the more we become embodied and clear about what our body is actually saying to us in the moment, and having this direct line of communication where we're not just these brains living with a body, but we're actually in alignment and allowing our energy to flow in all directions. I think that embodiment piece is so huge to the recognition of how we're living our life and how are we moving forward and what actually feels right in alignment for us and what's true. When it can be so easy to, like you say, be just on that hamster wheel. You're talking about being on those tracks, and like we can get so on that busyness. We're busy doing things all the time, and we forget how to be in and with ourselves.
In episode number 2, I spoke to one of my favorite musicians, Cactus Vela. We spoke about record stores and the joy that we used to know and are starting to know again, thanks to the resurgence in records. The joy of sifting through record bins and finding that elusive record that we wanted or an unknown record that we come to love. We also talked a little bit, and I shared an anecdote about one of his favorite bands, Leatherface. This clip is from episode number 2 with Cactus Vela. It takes me back to the days of, I'm going to get to Leatherface in a minute, but just flipping through bins of records and not knowing what you're going to find. Like there's something so visceral about that experience. And it can't be beat by any convenience that digital offers.
Yes, exactly. And it's so hard to do it these days because records are so expensive, like you said. But I mean, some of I can name I can look at a record and it could bring me back. I'm like, oh, I remember where I was when I bought that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And and then like even buying records by bands like pre-internet, buying records by bands that you never heard of, but merely because they were on the same record label as a band that you liked. Like that meant something and you could trust it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, what you just said is so true. Because I remember one of my favorite bands, punk bands, is Forgotten Rebels. I love the Forgotten Rebels. Yeah. And, I was with some buddies. I was probably 19, I guess, at the time, in a record store, flipping through was cassettes then. And seeing this, I had no idea who they were. I was just getting more into punk then anyway. I thought, okay, Forgotten Rebels, the name's pretty cool. Like,
Yep.
and then you flip it over, and the songs are called "Fuck Me Dead" and "Elvis is Dead" and "Surfing on Heroin." It's like, okay, this is not top 40. So
No, it's not.
yeah, so you buy it at cassettes like $9 or $10 then, or whatever it was. You take a shot at it, and it's still one of my favorite albums of all time. So
Oh, wow.
just that experience is something that you can't replicate.
That's
Go
right.
into your Spotify playlist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, so getting to Leatherface, you mentioned to me that Leatherface is it your favorite band? One of your favorite bands for sure.
Yeah, it's easy to call them my favorite.
Yeah. So, do you remember Record Peddler?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, one of the
Yeah.
greatest record stores. So I'm 21, I think, by this time, and I was living down in Toronto for a while. Moved there from up north. I'm back up north now, actually. So in the big city, and find this record store, and the song is playing, and I'm really digging it, but I'm poor as fuck at the time. I can't even buy a cassette at that point.
Right.
So I asked the guy working, like, who is this? Like, this is, and he told me. Okay, but that's the days. Obviously, you don't have a cell phone to make a note, right? And so I thought I'm repeating it on the way home, and of course I forget about it. So over the years go by, I'm thinking, who the fuck was that? Who was that? What was that? So, and all I could remember was the chorus, couple of lines of the chorus. So eventually the internet comes along, and I can start like searching, typing in the lyrics that I do know.
Right.
Eventually it leads me to Leatherface, basically. I thought, okay, that's familiar, because I was thinking metal face. Like, I sort of had like, that's got to be. So I go on to like Napster or Bear Share or LimeWire, whatever the hell it was at the time, and start downloading Leatherface songs. Every one, like, and the song was "Not Superstitious."
Ah, nice.
Which to this day is still one of my favorite songs. And find it, like, I kid you not, like, I was almost had tears in my eyes when I found that song and heard that song again. It was like a quest had been fulfilled.
Oh, that's a great story. I love that.
Yeah, it's amazing how music just hits you and sticks with you for forever. In episode number 3, I spoke to Gordon Woods. Gordon Woods is a man who over 50 years ago suffered horrific sexual abuse as a member of Celtic Boys Club in Scotland. In this clip, Gordon shares a very touching story about the wise words that his daughter shared with him that convinced him that it was finally time to come forward.
Actually, was the key to open that was my 10-year-old daughter came in from school, and she was upset. And I had received an email from school to say, Brianna's been upset today. And I sat her down and I said, why are you upset? And it was a simple thing. She had a problem at school, whereas her best friend at school had a problem with another girl. And my daughter had taken the other girl's side against her best friends. And I said to her, why did you go against your best friend? And she says, Dad, I had to do the right thing. But that sentence, I had to do the right thing. There's my daughter telling me. And yet, for 50 years, I hadn't done the right thing. Now it was time to do it. And the following day, I picked up the telephone and I called the solicitors who were mentioned in the court case from Torbet. And I said, look, I don't want to come forward. I don't want to get involved, but I have information for you that will be useful. And when I gave them that information, I was on the phone for a couple of hours, to be honest. And as expected, what they had to do was go and check everything I had said. Is this possible? What Gordon Woods is telling us actually happened? Is it possible? And I know you're going to be speaking to Peter Henderson soon, and Peter Henderson was part of that group at the time. And Peter Henderson went away and checked up on every single thing I had said, every accusation I'd made, by going through archives of newspapers, television reports, Celtic View newspapers. And what he did discover after a few days was every single thing I had said bore out.
Mm-hmm. In episode 4, I spoke to tattoo artist, author, podcaster Dan Hank. I spoke to Dan about his perseverance in bouncing back from setbacks such as brain cancer, losing his wife, and how his mental fortitude came to be, and how he has a dust yourself off and get on with it attitude. This is from episode number 4 with Dan Hank. Is there a correlation between the discipline you need to be great at a martial art like that, and that trickles over into your tattooing, your other art? Has that kind of discipline helped you be more disciplined in other facets of your life as well?
I think so. One thing I've noticed, I mean, it's the whole don't give up thing. It's like you have lots of people say, well, I don't know if you thought about this, like, don't let that discourage you. Look at them as like speed bumps, not blockades.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever anything bad happens in my life, I just try and look at it as a speed bump. I'm like, I'm here, I want to be here, and whatever's in the way, I'll just find out some way to go around it.
That's a great outlook to have. And that's a good segue as well, because I wanted to loop back. You mentioned your battle with brain cancer, and I also know that you've had other tragedies in your life, and I wanted to sort of touch on them a little bit. So how old were you when you had the brain cancer diagnosis? And when those words are said to you, what goes through your head? And is it like, okay, I'm going to kick this thing in the ass? Or is there like the thought of, oh my God, am I going to die? Or is it a little bit of all of that?
Well, I was in Bellevue Hospital having surgery in ICU when the Twin Towers went down. So, like, I was in bed in ICU, and you don't really sleep in ICU. It's like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. Mm-hmm. I remember we heard over the radio, oh my God, a plane just crashed into the tower. And they all thought it was like an accident when the first one hit. Mm-hmm. And then the second one hits, and they're like, oh, it was terrorism. And I remember the English-speaking TVs were not working. So the Spanish-speaking TVs, we see the images on, and the radio would tell us kind of what's going on, because I don't speak fluent Spanish. But I remember that's when it happened, and that was that was pretty surreal.
Absolutely. Now, is your mindset in that regard, because people deal with that kind of thing differently. Some people kind of give up and they accept their fate when it's not necessarily their fate, and some people just get on with the fight to overcome that. Were you immediately like, okay, this is the hand I've been dealt, this is what I've got to do?
That's pretty much what I did. Like I feel like my whole life is like, whatever I want to do, I had to fight for it. I wanted to be in the middle. I wanted to be in punk rock. I wanted to I wanted to read horror. I wanted to, and like there was always like that little negative voice speaking on the side, and you just got to go, you know what? This, whether you're right or wrong, you go, this is what I'm into. I'm going to try and go for this. Mm-hmm. And I remember when the whole brain cancer thing came up, I was living in New York. I finally started to make some consistent money as a tattoo artist. I was starting to make my way in the community. Like I slowly gotten better and better shops and so on. And then I came down with brain cancer. So I kind of looked at it. This, I'm not going to let this stop me. This is a speed bump. Like I made it all the way to New York. I'm a tattoo artist now. I'm not going to let it in here. What, this is going to be the end of me? No. So I remember and I was also at that point I seen the UFC, so I was like I need to learn more than Taekwondo. So at the time I was big into Jeet Kune Do, which is Bruce Lee's martial art, and I remember first I was getting headaches, and then I went to a clinic, and I went to a cheap clinic because it's all I could afford, and they said, oh well, it's probably because you got kicked in the head or punched in the head, just take this migraine medicine. Oh, but we're out. Just go to the pharmacy. I went to the pharmacy. They can read a script, and they said you have to go to a better clinic. So I went to a clinic that cost like 3 times as much. And they're like, oh, well, you're just dehydrated. And they pumped me full of saline solution. They're like, just call us tomorrow if it's worse. And the next day it was way worse. Like, my girl was taking me to the hospital, and I was walking sideways. I was trying to walk straight, but I was walking sideways. And my head felt like I had a jackhammer to the back. Like, I felt like putting a gum in my mouth and like leaning over the sink and just blowing my brains out just to make it stop. And I remember when they finally said, and they go, oh, what do you do? Oh, well, it's a brain bleed. They put me in the CAT scan. They go, oh, wait, it's cancer. I was like, oh. Well, to me, I was like, you finally know what it is. You can finally address it. Yeah. And my girl started crying. She's like, you don't care. I'm like, well, of course I care. What am I going to do?
In episode 5, I spoke to Craig Baird. Craig is host of the very entertaining and successful Canadian History X podcast. I asked him, because he has a 25-year limit on how far he will go back to do a podcast episode. So I asked him, which events will make for Canadian History X episodes 25 years from today? This is what Craig had to say about that. What do you think will be the stories that you will tell in 25 years? Obviously, there's going to be, I would think, a COVID-related episode. What else do you think the stories will be in 25 years when you're doing your podcasts?
Well, like you said, for sure, COVID. If I'm doing the 25-year cutoff, the forest fires that we had this year, because I have done a lot of disaster related podcasts, so that would be one. In fact, this year I've got one coming about the 1998 ice storm that hit Ontario and Quebec. So I kind of, if I was 25 years in the future, definitely those, the forest fires, the COVID, how that related to everything. But then also just kind of things like even what's going on in Alberta right now, where 25 years from now, did we pull out of the Canada Pension Plan? How did that work? A lot of the things going on with how things tend to be divided right now, and each province almost seems like they want to just go it alone. Or the Green Belt in Ontario, possibly an episode about that, talking about how it was really a grassroots movement that caused this massive reversal of a decision to protect the Green Belt. So there's plenty of things. I mean, we still got a few months. I don't know what's going to happen for the rest of the year. So there could be like a huge story that comes. But, that's why I like to have the 25 years, because I've had people contact me and say, why haven't you done anything about the convoy? Or why haven't you done anything about this? And it's like, I like to have that 25 years to kind of give more of a historical perspective of what actually happened afterwards. How did it influence things? How did things change? Whatever the topic I might be talking about. And I just feel like it's a good buffer time.
In episode 6, I spoke to Greg Sadler. We had a very interesting conversation about philosophy, stoicism, and many other topics. And I asked him about learning about philosophy, getting introduced to philosophy, and how important it is to be open-minded and not just narrowing yourself down to one philosopher, one philosophy, and to learn as much as you can from as many different angles as you can. And this is what Greg had to say about that. Would you say that philosophy is like, to each individual, like a buffet, like you just said?
I mean, it can be, yeah.
But I guess there's a danger in, like, I obviously don't think it's good to say, okay, I'm going to study the Stoics and that's it. Because like you said, Aristotle and Plato and led into, this, led into that. So it's not good to just limit yourself to just one, discipline. Is it is there any danger in picking and choosing? Because I think
There is, yeah.
sometimes people pick and choose what they want to hear.
Exactly.
And yeah, so I would assume that there's a danger in that as well when it comes to philosophy.
Yeah, there's a tendency for people to come in and they're like, what can I find that already confirms all of my biases that I have already, right? But and that's a good way to not understand the philosophy that you're going to pick too. So like, people would be like, oh, I like being a prick to people, so this Nietzsche guy's probably for me, and if you
Yeah.
read Nietzsche, he probably doesn't like you, the way that you're set up, right? So it depends on how serious you're going to take the advice, the judgment that the philosophers are themselves making. So I mean, like when you read Marcus Aurelius, if you're really taking him seriously and you're like, I think I should try to incorporate what he's thinking, there's probably a lot of things in your life that you're going to have to change, so if you're willing to do that, then I think there's nothing wrong with doing the picking, right? And you probably do want to study more than one different perspective. There's a lot, going back to the question that you asked about like the internet and proliferation of philosophy. Now, this is not something that just happened with the internet, but there's a lot of people who I facetiously call this being on Team X. So they're like Team Hegel or Team Stoicism or Team Epicureanism. And they think that if they accept anything from anybody else, that they're like screwing things up. Philosophy shouldn't work that way. It's not. I mean, even sports teams aren't like that. They trade back and forth constantly, right? It doesn't really work that way in the real world. But we have this idealized picture of like, I'm going to be a good Stoic, and then if anybody says anything bad about Stoicism, I'll attack them, and I won't accept anything bad from these other people over here. And that, if you read the Stoics, they would have rejected that. Seneca draws on Epicurus when he's talking to his Epicurean friend, and he's like, hey, if they got something good over there, I'm going to use it because it's the common good for humanity. It's not just an Epicurean thing, if it happens to be true. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, he actually was drawing on three different philosophical traditions: the Cynic, the Platonic, and the what was called the Megarian school at the time, and then he brought them together into his own new synthesis, which then developed over time. So this I'm going to be on Team X, like I'm going to be a Nietzschean, or I'm going to be, I don't know, pick whatever else you want. It's usually counterproductive for the people who do it. That's not to say that you shouldn't like hang out with people who are interested in the stuff that you're interested in. And the internet offers all sorts of really cool opportunities to find those things that, if we were stuck in the pre-internet age, I don't know. I mean, I would have read this stuff in the library, and if I was lucky, maybe found a club or something once in a while where people were interested in this, but I sure as hell wouldn't have like daily interaction talking about it, So that's really wonderful that we have that opportunity.
Dr. Orist was my guest on episode number 7. We had a very interesting talk about men's health, about men's issues, and we spoke about men as they get older in life just giving up, and how important it is to keep your feet moving as you get older, and how not to give up on life or on yourself. And I actually, in the first episode of my podcast, I actually talked about that in regards to myself. I found myself in that place where I wasn't living my life. I was just alive. And it definitely takes some deep introspection and some honest introspection, not, oh, well, it's the other person or it's this circumstance or that circumstance. It takes some honest, hard introspection to get past that. And it's only lately with a move back to where I was born and raised, a new job, that I've sort of found that spark again. And I can understand that there are probably a lot of men that are dealing with that same kind of life.
Yeah, I think also the thing is that I think a lot of this happens is a lot of guys just give up, and I don't know, maybe I'm just too stubborn, but and not to say that there have been setbacks, and and it's not like just for a day or so. Some of these setbacks are fairly significant. So, but at the end of the day, I feel like the only days I have to look forward to are the days ahead of me. Okay. And my gene pool is such that I'm probably going to live, there's a good chance I'm going to live past 100. Maybe even beyond that, given some of the things that are going on in the world, especially in the anti-aging space, which I spent a lot of time on my podcast. I spent a lot of time interviewing people in the anti-aging space. So that's a long time. It was always very interesting to me because when I was a periodontist, it wasn't a insurance based practice because I did a lot of dental implants and things like that. So basically, if you wanted something, you pulled out your credit card and you paid me. And so it was interesting that I would have people that were in their early 50s that would say like, "Oh, if I was younger, I'd do that." And I'd look at them and I'm going, and I was at that point, I practiced until I was a little bit past my 60s, a little bit past 65. And I looked at them and I'm going like, when do you think you're going to die? And how long do you want to spend the rest of your life like this? I mean, and they'd be kind of shocked by that because I was pretty direct about that kind of stuff. Like, when do you think you're going to die? What's your expiration date? And sometimes we talk about your family history. Oh, when my family's lived till 80. Well, okay. So you want to go 35 years like this?
Mm-hmm. That's a long time.
Yeah, it's a long time.
It absolutely is. Episode number 8, I spoke to Dr. Leslie Dobson. We had a very, very good conversation about many aspects of psychotherapy, about her experience working in a prison with very dangerous offenders. And I asked her about the comparison between PTSD in soldiers and the kind of PTSD that you would suffer in her kind of circumstances, working around dangerous inmates day in and day out. And this is what Dr. Leslie Dobson had to say about that topic. I remember this was years and years ago, an interview with a Canadian soldier who was in Afghanistan. And you mentioned working with the VA and those stories. Now, we obviously don't have as many veterans as you do down in the States. I'm in Canada. But we do have our veterans from Afghanistan that are unfortunately, just like your veterans, committing suicide at sickening rates. And this soldier told a story, was asked basically what it's like to be on patrol in the back of a vehicle or whatever. And he said, well, imagine driving to work and you have a 15-minute drive. But instead, that drive takes 4 hours because you have to go so slow in case of booby traps and so on in the road. And every second, you're wondering if this is the day that I get blown up. And that could still never sort of make me prepared for that situation myself, but it kind of gave me a little insight about, like, and I thought of that on my way to work sometimes, like, thought back to that conversation. Is there, in your experiences with the VA, I can imagine the people that you talked to and the stories that you heard, are those stories something that are in any way related, in any way similar to working in that prison facility with those psychopaths? From your perspective, like, you're walking in there, your eyes are always open, your ears are always open, you're wondering, is there any correlation between those two things?
Yes, I think of PTSD, and it doesn't matter how you get it. If you meet it, you meet it. If you are fearful of a threat to your personal and physical integrity, or if you are fearful or enduring a sexual assault, that's criteria 1 for PTSD. But there's such a range of severity. So many individuals in our military were not deployed. They may have feared being deployed, but they didn't endure the trauma of the individuals that went out and had to use their weapons, had to protect themselves against bombs and the guns and the explosives. So I think I might have had a little taste of it. And I was definitely in the setting for a lot longer than a 3-month deployment. But the stories of those short deployments were absolutely horrifying. And the moral injury that our military has sustained, coming home knowing that their friends did not live and that they did, or the child they had to kill because that child was going to kill, and people standing next to them. The living with the fact that they survived is something I've never had to experience.
In episode number 9, I spoke to Moises Goldman and Sherry Maisonneuve, author of the book Tete's Promise, an incredible story about Moises's mother and her escape from the Auschwitz concentration camp. Moises and Sherry shared the incredible story of her escape with her sister, and here is the clip from that episode. Did your mother help one of her sisters to escape from Auschwitz?
Yes, my mom became a mother and my father to her 2 younger sisters. Rachel was 6 years younger than her, and Sarah was 10 years younger than her. When they went through the selection, she couldn't help Sarah. Sarah died in the crematoriums right away, but during the chaos, she pulled Rachel from one line towards her line, which was that's how she saved Rachel.
And at what year was that they escaped?
The escape?
Yes.
January 1945, the first week in January 1945.
Okay. And so let's move a little bit forward. So after they escaped from Auschwitz, where did they go then? What happened next?
Well, they found themselves in the rural area near Auschwitz, just miles from Auschwitz. And they jumped on it. It was snowing very, very hard, and they had low visibility. They jumped on a trailer with hay on it, and they hid in the hay. The driver had hidden his coat in the hay, so he stops because it's freezing, and the snow has turned more wet. And he gets out and he discovers them there, and he locks them in a barn and plans to take them back to Auschwitz the next morning. But Hinda finds an escape route out of the barn, and amazingly, and they walk a kilometer and a half. It's very early in the morning, still dark, 4 a.m, and they find a 2-story home that had a light on, and they went there. And they were allowed to stay there for a week. And that's an entire story too, where they were going to be kicked out, but Hinda's boldness, once again, some people are bold and they're stupid. Hinda was bold and she was brilliant. She knew she could think so quickly on her feet, and she knew how to assess a situation and read people. And so she spoke with this family, Mr. Mielik, the the head of the family, Mr. Mielik, and he took her to the barn, and she told him the whole story, that they were escapees from Auschwitz. And he then let them stay for 1 week, but 1 week only.
Mm-hmm.
And so then from there, a Gestapo officer takes them, and then they end up staying in his home for like 6 weeks. And then they're on to they're kicked out of there, and they're on to stay in an elderly couple's home in very rural. She wasn't even sure where they were at that point. So many lines had been redrawn with the war.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on and on. They had so many interesting, intriguing travails. And many times it was the kindness of others that saved them, but it was always because of Hinda's courage.
So an officer with the Gestapo gave them shelter for...
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
This is fascinating. It's because this shows you how smart Hinda was, in that she told him that she could help save him from the Russians, because at that point, the Red Army was approaching that area.
Right, because this was 45, right?
Yes, and the Red Army actually freed Auschwitz in, I think, January 25th of 1945. So they were approaching that area, and the German people were very afraid of the Russians coming in and taking them over. And she convinced him, showing him her Auschwitz tattoo, that if she showed the Russians that, because they wanted to take Hitler down, that they would then, if she told him that the Gestapo officer and his family, the Almoses, had been very kind to them and had saved her life and protected her, that they would then not kill him.
Wow.
That's how smart she was.
That's amazing. And she's a teenage girl at the time.
Well, she is, this is 1945. She was born in 1921. So,
It was almost 24 or 24.
20.
Right.
Mhm.
But still, to have that wherewithal at that age while going through all of that and trying to save your life and your sister's life, that's
Right.
incredible.
And remember, they were malnourished. They had been starved for years and years and years. So, you get brain fog typically with such severe malnourishment. But she still was able to somehow think clearly.
And as you mentioned earlier that they escaped, they saw the home with the light on. She had no idea who was in that home.
No.
That could have been anybody. That could have been another Nazi officer. That could have just dragged them back.
Right.
But you've got to take the chance, right? Like you've got to.
And that's what Hinda. She was always willing to take the chance.
On episode number 10, I was fortunate enough to speak to Lightnin' Charlie, an incredible musician who lives in Johnson City, Tennessee. And he shared the incredible story of his aunt venturing to Graceland to meet Elvis. Here's that story from episode 10 featuring Lightnin' Charlie. So, how did your aunt come to know Elvis?
That's a great story. I tell it in detail in my book, Off the Record. This is going to sound crazy. It sounds crazy to me, but my grandmother and grandfather lived in East Tennessee, in a little town called Greenville, Tennessee, which is 450 miles from Memphis, almost the entire length of the state away from Memphis, Tennessee. My grandmother was a seamstress. She wrote a song, and this was in 1956. My grandmother wrote a song. I don't know that she ever wrote a song before or since. She didn't play an instrument. She didn't sing. I don't know where this song came from, but she had a song. So now the next step after you write a song is to get someone to sing it, right? So who are you going to get to sing it? Well, the biggest star on earth in 1956, Elvis. So how do we get the song to Elvis? Well, that's easy. She puts her 16-year-old daughter, Jeanette, that's my aunt, on a Greyhound bus with the song sends her from Greenville to Memphis, 450 miles away, don't know a soul in Memphis, Tennessee. She checks into a hotel in Memphis and goes down to the gates of Graceland. It's just, and that would have been in 57. Elvis bought Graceland, I think, in like March of 57. And she's hanging out at the gates with all the other fans and stuff and talking to the gatekeeper who invited her to dinner. He found out she was in town alone, everything, invited her to his house for a home cooked meal, meet his wife. He had said, I have 2 sons that are your age. And when he gets off his shift, he opens the gates, lets her in, gets in a golf cart, and they go up the driveway, and he gets out and says, come on. And she says, I thought we were going to your house for dinner. He says, well, we are. This is my house. I live here. I'm Elvis's Uncle Travis.
Wow.
And so she goes in and she remained friends with Aunt Lorraine. That's Travis's wife, Lorraine, until her death. And a greater starter kit for a rock and roll singer and a guy, a kid, who's just loves rock and roll music, loves country music, loves gospel, loves pop music, loves rock music, loves soul music. Who's a better kind of a template for combining all that stuff than Elvis Presley,
Absolutely. And so was that song ever recorded? Anything
good
ever
question.
come of it?
Nobody knows what happened to that song. Nobody. Once Jeanette gets into Graceland, I don't know if she ever remembered to even give the song to. Whatever happened. What the story of the song ends when she gets inside the gates of Graceland. When she was then somehow miraculously able to then do something with the song. If Elvis was, I can't imagine the song was any good, but it's just an incredible story. But a copy of the song doesn't exist. I've never seen a copy of the song, even as a kid. It's just lost to history, I guess.
Wow. And when you say she took the song to Elvis, what did that look like? Was it her singing on a tape? Like, was it just the lyrics?
Nobody sang. Like, nobody in my family, none of my mother's side. My mother played piano in church and stuff, and my dad sang, like around the house and stuff, and had a good voice. But as far as nobody could sing a song, not even demo it. It would have been lyrics written on a sheet of notebook paper. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I guess once Jeanette got in there, she lost all sense of time and space to even remember why she came. It's funny because she went as a 16-year-old. She said she liked Elvis's records, but she thought it was ridiculous the way girls reacted when they saw him, with Elvis mania, pulling their hair out and screaming and trying to tear his clothes off. She says, I like his records, okay, but I was a bigger fan of Buddy Holly. And so she took this Greyhound bus, I don't know, 450 miles on a Greyhound in 1957, pre-interstate. It must have taken 24 hours or something, right?
Right.
Stops. And she said she sang Buddy Holly's song every day, over and over and over, probably sung a 3-minute song, 500,000 times. I bet the people on the bus were never so happy to get rid of somebody. But she said that she was just there as wasn't a crazy lunatic fan. And then she saw him. And she used to talk about what he looked like. And there's a lot of people around Elvis, his Memphis Mafia guys and so forth, that talk about that nobody looked like Elvis did. Mm-hmm. That he was like the prettiest. I think Red West or Sonny West, one of his Memphis Mafia guys, was quoted as saying, he's prettier than any woman I'd ever. He says, I'm a heterosexual man. I'm married, whatever. I'm straight as an arrow and everything. But Elvis was the prettiest human being I've ever seen. And my Aunt Jeanette's story was that she's in the house, and everybody sleeps all day, and Elvis, nothing starts happening till Elvis gets up at 3-4 o'clock or whatever, and they would get ready to go out to wherever they were going to do. And so she's walking down a hallway upstairs and passes the bathroom, and Elvis is inside the bathroom with the door open, and he had on his dress slacks. He had gotten out of the shower. He's shirtless but with a bath towel around his neck, and he's in the bathroom mirror, and he's combing his hair, and he's doing his DA in the back, and he's got the towel so that the Brill cream and stuff don't get on his popped collar of the dress shirt. And my Aunt Jeanette walked by and looked in there and saw him and just froze. And Elvis looked, and my Aunt Jeanette said, she started stuttering and stammering, and she said to him, "You're not very photogenic." And Elvis looked at her and he said, "Photogenic." And he just kept combing his hair and corrected her pronunciation. But she said nobody looked like him. And that was, having 1 degree of separation as a kid, hearing these stories from my aunt who we just loved. She was, like I said, she was like a second mother. She didn't have kids of her own. So my brother and sister and I were her babies. And I couldn't have asked for a better musical education as far as records and record making. And
Episode number 11 featured David Essel. David Essel is a sports psychologist, and we had a very interesting conversation as well. We talked about coaches using methods that would be likely considered unorthodox. And as a reference, I mentioned one of my favorite coaches in any sport and the methods he used after losing a tough match. And David went on to talk about Phil Jackson and his rather unorthodox, in the world of sports anyway, methods of teaching his players. Here's a clip from episode number 11 with David Essel. So I'm going to switch gears to a little bit of a story about a different sport that is near and dear to my heart. I'll call it football. It's more known as soccer in North America. So my favorite football team is Liverpool, and they have a manager, Jurgen Klopp, who is pretty much legendary at the moment. And there's a story about they were playing in a big game, a cup final. I think it was his second year there, maybe. And they lost, and all the players were obviously devastated because it was a European Cup final, Europa League final. And he came in, and the players were all down, and he said, basically, everybody, meet in whatever room in 15 minutes, and we're gonna have a little celebration. And the players are thinking, like, we just lost. Why are we celebrating? Mm-hmm. And he said, because, basically we lost together as a team, and this is only the first step in our journey. And we have to remember these moments as well as the moments where we're triumphant. And after that, they went on to win league titles and European Cups. How much is that kind of an attitude? Like, yeah, we lost, but this is still a moment to reflect on what we accomplished together. How much is that kind of message important to send out to athletes and to teams?
Scott, it's crucially important, and it's rarely done. Honestly, I mean, it is rarely done. Now, that is called a teacher. That coach is a teacher, and he's teaching a valuable life lesson. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen that often. I'll tell you, the one coach I know that would go to that level would have been Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson had them reading, from Roman emperors. He had them reading all kinds of deep philosophical books. He would be making quotes in practice constantly. He would have the team reading books and discussing deep philosophical practices so that we don't become attached. And so the whole thing with attachment, it comes from Buddhism. And what Buddha said is that our suffering is caused by our desire that life should be different than it is. Right? So we think about that. The suffering is caused not from the loss, but from the fact that we didn't think we should lose. So Phil Jackson would take something like that and say, hey, listen, we're creating our own suffering. Yeah, we couldn't match their offense. We couldn't match their defense. We didn't play at our level, right? But there's no reason to be down right now. Because if you're attached and you have to win every game to be happy, the odds are you're not going to have a very successful season. And when you have teachers like that, and the soccer coach that you just told me, who I believe is just a great philosophical teacher, to be quite frank with you, that is so necessary, but it's extremely rare, Scott. I wish we could say that it happened all the time. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't other coaches doing this underneath the table, but there's very few that are bringing it onto the table and saying, this is what we do with our players, and this is how we handle losses, and this is how we handle this. It would be great to have them do it. I'm not sure if some coaches might think, we're not going to give our secrets away. Phil Jackson could have cared less. He was talking about it all the time, about what these different spiritual practices and Eastern teachings did to turn his life around. So he was just sharing what helped him, that helped his players. And it does make a difference. If you have, and think about this, Scott, I don't know, how many of any professional sports that the coaches are saying, I want you to read this book. I want you to read that book. But when we work with athletes, they're reading these type of books all the time, because the mental state is where you win and lose. It is your desire to play defense in any sport that creates the opportunity to win. And I'll go back to defense because of my experience with Larry Miller. I would never have imagined that without meeting him, I would not have made as a walk-on the Syracuse University basketball team. There is no doubt in my mind, Scott, I would never have made that team had it not been for someone I don't care for or didn't care for at the time, right? So we need to be looking at these principles that you and I are talking about tonight. We need to be looking for ways outside of our given sport to have mental fortitude, mental toughness, mental confidence, and the ability to let what doesn't work go.
In episode 12, I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with Michelle Rice-Govreau. Michelle was adopted illegally to a family in the United States off of a reservation in Canada. We talked about her meeting her birth family and visiting the reservation in Canada and the kind of culture shock that it was for her in those circumstances. Here is my conversation with Michelle Rice-Govreau from episode number 12. You mentioned the culture shock about going to visit your family for the first time on the reservation. So to talk about that a little bit, was it what exactly was the culture shock? Just was it the way of living? Was it the sense of community that you mentioned? I guess there was a bunch of things that went into it, but just talk. I think it was everything
you just mentioned, and then some. When I first went to the reservation, I was like, "Wow!" There was still some old houses still standing, from way back when. The church is still there from the 1700s. It's a beautiful church. There's a seaway where you see ships coming down. It's just, it was just beautiful. And the sense of community was amazing to me. The food, I mean, we all eat the same foods, right? But there's a different way of making foods. Like they make meat pies, or they'll make something else. They'll do different things with vegetables, and, a lot of stuff, which is still the same that we eat, but sometimes different. I absolutely adored it all. And I adored meeting people, and taking part of their powwow. Native Americans, we have powwows where a lot of natives get together and dance around in a circle or around the fire, and we honor the earth and we honor each other. And the drum, I love the drum. That, it just sends our spirits soaring. And the one great thing on the reservation, and it's still it's so funny when you go to the reservation. If you're going to meet people, you kind of need good directions because there are no street signs whatsoever. No street names, I should say. There are some street signs to stop and but there are no street names, and basically you call the person and they can either direct you or somebody will direct you up there. But there are landmarks up there. And I think way back when I first met my family, I was 15. So I think there were about 6,000 that lived there. Now it's upwards of about 10,000 that live on the reservation. Yeah, just on our reservation alone. I don't know the population of others, but I would assume they're pretty well populated. Mm-hmm. And some still live traditionally, and some, I think way back in the woods, some people still don't have water or things like that.
In episode 13, I talked to the very entertaining Wayne McFarland, a man who has a literal book full of stories from his life. And we talked about getting arrested in the southern United States by a rather unsavory sheriff. Take it away, Mr. McFarland. Your story reminds me of a TV show I'm watching right now about Billy the Kid, which is it's a drama, but it's an interesting TV show, and just mindless entertainment to have on in the evening or whatever. And so they're in a town, and of course there's a rich landowner in the town, and he's crooked, and he's got the sheriff in his back pocket. No matter where the heroes turn, they are met with, resistance. And you think, oh, it's a drama, it's a TV show, whatever. But, your story just shows that there are and will be places like that are actually that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I remember from that is that, when you're younger and you get shot, what's the first thing you do is you go to the police, right? Mm-hmm. And
not that I would know, but I would assume, yeah. Knock on wood.
You sheltered person, you.
I know, never been shot before.
Yeah, and we did that, and it was a little town, and the sheriff showed up and invited us to come inside the jail while he made a call. So we figured he was, I don't know, calling for the cavalry. And he just got on the phone and said, "Hey, yeah, this is Clem. Got some boys here been shot up." And then the rest of his conversation was just, And at the end of it, he slammed the phone down, took out his gun, and pointed at us and said, "In the cells, boys." And so clearly he called somebody who had some knowledge of this and said, "These lads are freedom riders, and they're down here to tell us how to live," and the sheriff was part of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I hope you've enjoyed this episode full of selected clips from the first 13 episodes of the Sunday Morning Coffee podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure to speak to all of these people and to bring my conversations with them to you. Cheers for listening, and we will see you next Sunday. Bye for now.